This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste, and it's been an interesting week so far. So we're going to jump right into it because there's a lot I want to cover on today's show based on some things that have already happened this week and conversations I've been having to people. So I want to remind you that the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So the plan for today's show is that the first half of the show is going to address this issue of how can we truly listen objectively, because we get so programmed to be in our silos, in our bubbles of what we recognize in the truth as the truth, and what we want to recognize as the truth, and really what we want to listen to, what we want to hear, and anything that is not reinforcing that, we have a tendency not to want to hear it. And it doesn't help that we're in the kind of age, especially if you're on the internet or on social media. It's very interesting when you're surfing something on the internet and the next thing you know, it's popping up in your feed to see if it's something you're interested in buying. It's something related to what you were researching, or something you clicked on, a video you wanted to watch. And so you're establishing your digital footprint for consumerism, as well as for what you have a tolerance to listen for in the political arena, because typically, depending on where we are in our journey to becoming one human nation, it's very difficult to listen to all of these different points of views and to try to be open-minded and impartial. And so the question that I want to ask you, and for those of you who are driving, just kind of brace yourself, because it may make you cringe a little bit. But the question that I want to ask you is, did you listen to the State of the Union address? And if you did listen and watch the State of the Union address, how did you feel about that? I've had some people that said, I just couldn't. I just couldn't listen. I'm sure if I asked others, they'd be like, it was great, it was wonderful, it was fantastic. And my point is, even in talking about reconciliation as far as politics in different points of view, we have to be able to at least listen. So the tool that I use for the State of the Union address, because I get tired of being manipulated by media. So what I decided to do was just to listen, not watch it. Just listen. I didn't want to be part of, looking at where the camera panned and looking at people's expression and have that impact how I felt about what was said. I just wanted to listen, hopefully with an open mind. And it wasn't about being in agreement with what was being said, but at least to listen, because at the end of the day, it was the President of the United States. So part of our, I think, civic obligation, no matter what the politics, with something like that, it is, if we don't listen, then you're depending on the commentaries after, or what comes through on your Facebook feed. And a lot of that we know is pure manipulation. So how do we get to this point? And I discovered this really interesting TED Talk that we're going to listen to from this person that kind of went undercover to get a different digital footprint. And so, you can pick up this watch the actual YouTube video, because of course it's radio and we're going to be listening to the clips here. But it was very interesting, and I'm going to challenge you, before I even say the title, I'm going to challenge you, listen to the entire episode that we're going to be doing and listening to these clips within the first half of the show. If something is said by the person speaking, even if that person is me, if something is said that is creating tension, or you just are feeling yourself shut down, try to work through it and try not to change the station or go do something else or mute the sound or any of those things we do to try to manage our tension. I want you to try to work through the tension so we can start practicing how to truly listen. And because if we can't listen, we can't really engage in civil conversation. Because it gets very emotional. So I can guess that there's going to be something that this gentleman says that's going to rub you the wrong way. And I challenge you to work through it, listen through it, and see how he works through his reconciliation journey. And we're, to give you a little bit of background, the title of this particular clip or this particular TED Talk is "A Black Man Undercover in the Alt-Right." And this is the other thing that I've noticed in this country. We are so divided based on politics. There seems to be an assumption that if somebody is a Democrat, they're liberal. If somebody is a Republican, they're conservative. And it's gotten to the extreme that if you are liberal, you're to the alt-left. And if you're conservative, you're to the alt-right. And we've got all of these labels that are really polarizing our country in a way that I don't think is healthy for healing. Because in order to get through reconciliation, especially race reconciliation, such a sensitive topic, we have to be able to listen to the truth. So let's start with listening to this intro from Theo, talking about how he found himself kind of being, thrust into a viral world based on something that he did. And the next thing he knew, he was, famous or infamous. So let's take a listen.
Famous. I was just talking about the things that I cared about, but with the click of a button and an incendiary viral video, I propelled myself into overnight stardom. When I say overnight,
my apologies. I
literally woke up the next morning with so many notifications on my phone, I thought I slept through a national tragedy.
Okay.
It was the craziest thing, guys, but when it came to my influence and my exposure, I literally took a quantum leap. So I made more videos. And the subject matter of my videos was often the most divisive subject in American life. But it was the way that I articulated race that made me somewhat of a digital lightning rod. See, being a survivor myself of police brutality and having lost a childhood friend, Alonzo Ashley, at the hands of the police, I had a little something to say about the topic. You see, this was at the height of the Black Lives Matter furor, and people seemed to be turning to me to articulate their viewpoints, and honestly, it was sort of overwhelming. Because nothing trips you out like being a political star on the internet. There is no class to teach you how to deal with when people treat you like a messianic figure, a prophet, a new school charismatic leader for the digital age. Folks treating you like T'Challa the Black Panther from the Marvel universe is flattering at first. But down the road, it gets a little troublesome. You see, the internet has this interesting quality. In one way, totally brought the world together. And I remember being a kid, And all of this utopian propaganda was being dumped on us about how the World Wide Web was going to span the reaches of people across the globe. But as it turns out, people are people. And this magical superhighway also took the demons of our nature and gave them Ferraris. You see, technology, y'all, is a lot like money. It just brings out what's already inside you and amplifies it. And so I soon became familiar with the phenomenon of the internet troll. These guys seem to live beneath the bridges of said superhighway. And they also missed the memo about the enlightenment of the internet age. I remember being called highly colorful racial slurs by those who use the anonymity of the internet as a clan hood. And some of them were pretty creative, actually, but others were pretty wounding, especially navigating the post-traumatic world of a police brutality survivor in the height of Black Lives Matter, with all of these people being killed on my timeline. To these trolls, I wasn't a human. I was an idea, an object, a caricature. Did I mention that this race stuff can be kind of divisive? You see, I'm an innately curious person. And as I drew my sword to engage in epic battles in the comment section, I also began to notice that a few of my trolls actually had brains, which made me even more curious and want to understand them even further. And although these supposed morons engaged in what appeared to be original thought, I said to myself, these guys are highly misinformed, at least according to my knowledge. Where are these guys getting these arguments from? Like, was there some kind of alternative universe with alternative facts? like was history and gravity optional over there? I don't know. But I needed to know, like I wanted to know. And as it turns out, I had no idea about digital echo chambers. That same target marketing algorithm that feeds you more of the products you like to buy also feeds you more of the news that you like to hear. I had been living in an online universe that just reflected my worldview back to me. So my timeline was pretty liberal. I had no Breitbart or InfoWars or Fox News. No, I was all MSNBC and The Daily Show, CNN and The Griot, right? Well, these trolls were hopping the dimensional doorway, and I needed to figure out how. So what I decided to do was trick the Facebook algorithm into feeding me more news that I didn't necessarily agree with. And this worked fine for a while, but it wasn't enough because my online footprint already established the patterns that I like to hear. So, with the anonymity of the internet, I went undercover. I set up this ghost profile and went crazy.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation show, and we are exploring the topic of how we get so entrenched in our own world, and sometimes we don't even realize it because we're so, I hate to use the word manipulated through social media, but in many ways we're manipulated. And the person that's doing this TED Talk, Theo, he's telling the story about, how he really wanted to figure out how to get out of this digital echo chamber and really explore another point of view, another thought. So remember, the title of this TED Talk is A Black Man Undercover in the Alt-Right. So hang in there, because this is probably not going to go the way you're thinking. And the whole point of the One Human Nation show is for us to be open, to listen, and you're in a safe place. Hopefully you're in your car or at home or somewhere where you can listen. And if you get frustrated, hopefully you'll work through the tension and just persevere and listen to, as he talks about now, how he went about creating this alternate personality.
Now, on a practical level, it was very simple, but on an emotional level, it was kind of daunting, especially with the racist vitriol that I had experienced. But what I didn't realize is that my trolls were inoculating me, thickening my skin, making me immune to viewpoints that I didn't necessarily agree with. And so I didn't react to the same things as I would have several months prior, all right? So I pressed on. Noticing that this stuff also worked on YouTube, I became Lucius25, white supremacist lurker. And digitally, I began to infiltrate the infamous alt-right movement. Now, my doppelganger was Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter character, a sci-fi hero who was once a Confederate soldier. And to think, like years ago, I would have needed like acting training and like makeup and a fake ID. Now I could just lurk. And so I started with a little InfoWars, went on into some American Renaissance, National Vanguard Alliance, and I started commenting on videos, talking bad about Al Sharpton and Black Lives Matter. I started bemoaning race baiters like Eric Holder and Barack Obama, and just mirroring the anti-black sentiments that were thrown at me. And to be honest, it was kind of exhilarating. Like, I would literally spend days clicking through my new racist profile. Goofing off at work in Aryan land, it was something else. And so I then started visiting some of the pages of my former trolls. And a lot of these guys were just regular Joes, a lot of outdoorsmen, hunters, computer nerds, some of them family guys with videos of their families. I mean, for all I know, some of y'all could be in this room right now, right? But when I went undercover, I found a lovely plethora of characters, luminaries like Milo Yiannopoulos, Richard Spencer, and David Duke. All of these guys were thought leaders in their own right. But over time, the alt-right movement ended up using their information to fuel their momentum. And I'm going to tell you what else led to the momentum of the alt-right. The left wing's wholesale demonization of everything white and male. If you are a pale-skinned penis haver, you're in league with Satan. Would you believe that some people find that offensive? The fact is that millennials get a lifetime of diet brand history. I mean, America seems to be hell-bent on filling its textbooks with Cliff Notes versions of its dark past. This severely decontextualizes race and the anger associated with it. And that is fertile ground for alt-facts to grow. Add in the wild landscape of the internet, and it's easy to sell rebranded Mein Kampf ideas to a generation who has been failed by public schools. A lot of these ideas, easily debunked. Alt-facts have that quality. However, one thing kept screaming at me through the subtext of those arguments, and that was, why should I be hated for who I cannot help but be? That was a black man in America that resonated with me. I've spent so much time defending myself against attempts to demonize me and make me apologize for who I am, trying to portray me as something that I'm not, some kind of thug or gangster, or menace to society. Unexpected compassion. Wow. Now listen, the historical source of the demonization of black males and white males is highly different. And where you fall on this argument, sadly tends to be an accident of birth. Now, you're probably surprised by this perspective, and so was I. Never in a billion years did I think that I could have some kind of compassion for people who hated my guts. Now, mind you, not enough compassion, like want to be friends. I don't have infinite olive branches to extend to people who would not want to see me on this planet, right? But just enough compassion to understand how they got to where they are. And to be honest, there were a couple of fair points. One of them, how as liberals have this wide acceptance for everybody, except for those with honestly held conservative viewpoints. Heaven forbid you love God, this country, and mean it, right?
So if you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation show, and we're listening to a TED Talk from Theo E.J. Wilson is his name, and he's talking about how he was curious enough to go on this journey to create this alternate identity in social media, just based on he found himself kind of like an overnight sensation over something that he had posted from his phone, and realizing that if he wanted to really have a better understanding kind of the other side, he would have to be courageous enough to open open himself up to some emotional pain. And so he's talking about how this identity creation happened with this digital footprint. And, the question that he asked that kind of resonated with me is when he says, why should I be hated for who I cannot help myself be? That unexpected compassion. Do we have compassion for another point of view? And this is what this is all about, because it's kind of triggered from some of the feedback that I've gotten from the State of the Union address. And, I don't listen to a lot of the commentaries and what I call the chatter, because I realize that people are in their silos and they're desperately holding on to their truth, but it's really not helping us to get to reconciliation in the political arena. We're not even talking about race. We're talking about even in the political arena, the danger of labeling people. And he's talking about now how he's discovering how this alt-right side of the fence looks and what their fears are. So that's where we're going to pick up on one of the other major fears that he uncovered in just listening to their side of the story.
And another thing that they talked about was this fear that they had of something that they labeled as white genocide, that diversity would be a force that will wipe them out. Now listen, I know what it is to fear for the fate of your people. Between crack, AIDS, gang violence, mass incarceration, gentrification, police shootings, black people have more than enough reasons to stay up at night. But if nature is into diversity and you're not, you're going to lose that fight, buddy. You see, nature doesn't care about your race. That's man-made. Nature just cares about healthy organisms, and your precious ethnic features are expendable to that end. So the moment that you let go of that racist identity and re-latch onto humanity, all your problems go away. I'm going to tell you what race ain't about to die out. The human race. Join the party, the water's great. Until the water gets too high, but that's another TED Talk. The point is that to get to this point of understanding, you have to let go of that fear and embrace your curiosity. And sadly, too many people will not take that journey to see the world from the other side. And I mean, let's be honest, that doesn't just go for progressives, but also to the right wing and conservatives. As fair as some of their points were, they were still trapped in their own echo chambers, recycling old, outdated points of view, never getting a diversity in perspective, not making them well-rounded in their worldview. So they're not hearing certain anti-racist and political voices, voices like Tim Wise and Michelle Alexander, Dr. Joy DeGruy, Boyce Watkins, Tariq Nasheed. All of these voices have the answers to the questions that they want, but unfortunately they will not hear them due to the power of these echo chambers. We have got to break out of these digital divides, because as our technology advances, the consequences of our tribalism become more dangerous. And this whole experience taught me something. Our gadgets ain't gonna save us. All these technological devices are only mastery of the universe out there, not the one in here. And so that's all IQ, not EQ. That's a dangerous imbalance. Where do you get the emotional intelligence, the character development, the virtues of patience, forbearance, compassion, the things that make sure that these devices, however advanced, become a blessing and not a curse? Seems to me that humanity itself needs an upgrade. That's a big task, understandably. But I don't believe in any kind of unbeatable monster. There was no giant out there without perhaps a simple Achilles heel. Now, what if I told you that one of the best ways to actually overcome this is to have courageous conversations with difficult people, people who do not see the world the same way that you see the world? Oh yes, folks, conversations may be indeed the key to that upgrade. Because remember, language was the first form of virtual reality. It is literally a symbolic representation of the physical world. And through this device, we change the physical world. Keep in mind, conversations stop violence. Conversations start countries. They build bridges. And when the chips are down, conversations are the last tool that humans use before they pick up the guns. And I ain't talking about online safe conversations from the security of your laptop. No, I'm talking about in-your-face conversations with real, breathing people.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation show, and we're exploring this topic of how we have to be really fearless and courageous to open ourselves up to some of the emotional pain that we may experience by listening to the other side of the story. That in order for us to get to reconciliation, to get to some change, to get to social justice and economic justice, we have to be able to at least listen to the other point of view. And when I've talked to different people this week about just getting feedback on, okay, did you listen to the State of the Union address? It's surprising how many were so into their silo that the answer to that was no, or negative, or just it's very interesting how we've gotten so polarized in this country, and we're going to have to break out of that. We have to figure out a way to move past that. And so this TED Talk that we're listening to, this particular person is talking about how we have to be willing to have courageous conversations with difficult people. So we're going to listen to the last part of this clip to learn, the rest of his story as far as what he did in his community, and hopefully gets us thinking of what we can each do in our community as we move forward, and to have conversations. And I'm not talking about only conversations about race. I'm talking about conversations about things that are dividing us, and I think intentionally dividing us. So let's take a listen.
And for me, this looks like running a community forum called Shop Talk Live. In Shop Talk Live, we have the conversations that change lives. We meet the community right where they are, and we've done everything from divert gang violence in real time to help find people jobs to mentoring homeless youth. And the reason why we needed to do this is because there was a severe lack of trust in the black community due to the violence of the crack era. And so we ended up taking agency into our own hands, solving our own problems, not waiting for anybody else. And the truth is, from the mayor to the felon, you're going to find them in that barbershop. And so what we did was just organize what was already going on. And so what I started doing was mining these alternative viewpoints from these alternative digital universes, dissecting them, breaking them down into controversial talking points. Then, with my cell phone, I flipped the internet against itself and began to broadcast these live conversations to my online followers. This made them want to leave the safety of their laptops and meet us in person to have real conversations with real people in real life. And we did this, thank you. We built bridges to so many other communities, from the LGBTQ community to the Arab immigrant community, and even sat down with somebody with a Confederate flag on their hat and talked about the things that actually mattered. It is time that we stop trying to hack our way around the human experience. There is no way out of each other. Stop trying to find one. We have to understand something. Human beings all want the same things, and we have to go through each other to get these things. These courageous conversations are the way that these bridges are built. It is time that we start seeing people as people, and not simply the ideas that we project onto them or react to. Human beings are not the barriers, but the gateways to the very things that we want. This is a collective and conscious evolution. My journey began with a terribly popular cell phone video and a fallen friend. Your journey begins right about now. Join the Renaissance in human connection. It is going to happen with or without you. My suggestion, pick a topic and start a community dialogue in your neck of the woods. Meet folks back in real life, and I'm going to tell you, when you trick the algorithm of your existence, you will get some diversified experiences. It is time to grow, people. And when we do this, not if, it will be clear that the key to this upgrade was always our inner world, not some device that we create. And the doorways to this experience is now and will forever be each other. Thank you.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation show on WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So we're going to listen to an announcement and take a little break. In the second half of the show, it's going to get more, we're going to shift gears a little bit, just a little bit. I'm going to share another clip that I think is interesting from a person that really talks about how did we get here with this whole race topic. But before I do this transition, hopefully I've given you some things to think about in where you are in your silo or bubble, and given you some thought to what it's your journey. You know, this is what makes it so tough. Not anyone can give you a magical, mystical formula. There is no vaccine that we can take to, help us through making this process less painful. There's going to be some pain for us to get to healing. So think about that, and I'll let that rest right there as we listen to this public service announcement.
This year's Savannah Book Festival headline authors will include Diana Gabaldon of the Outlander series, Lisa Coe of The Leavers, and Jodi Picoult of My Sister's Keeper. More than 40 other writers will be featured from February 15th through the 18th. The main festival is on Saturday, February 17th in Telfair Square. More information is available at savannahbookfestival.org or at 912-598-4040.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUULP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUULP. Welcome back to the One Human Nation show, and we've been exploring, based on the week that some of us have had, kind of a for some, a very sensitive week because of the State of the Union address. And fortunately, I'm at my place in my journey that I try to listen with things with an open mind. But sometimes it's listening and not just watching, because once you start realizing how we're manipulated by what we see, you have to really figure out, well, how am I going to work around this? And then the other topic that we're going to talk about or explore, listen more about is, when you think about this is 2018. And we're still having conversations, and this is the little shift for the second half of the show, and we're still having conversations about race and racism. It brings to mind, how do we get here? And we talk about, what happened with the indigenous people that were here before we got here. We talk about slavery. We talk about colonization. But I did a search because I really wanted to find someone that was, kind of bringing some humor to the situation. And I did. So we're going to listen to this talk from Tim Wise, and he pretty much nails it, and getting things into perspective for us to kind of see and listen to the truth of how we got here. And for some of us, it's not an easy task to listen to this story because we've kind of framed our own idea of what the truth is. So let's take a listen.
Because if you know the history of the whole concept of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick, and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term. really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland, Highlanders. And so there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured like many poor Europeans for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. The whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't want to kill them all. You had to do the work yourself. You had to build your own levee, build your own house. No. Pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land. Not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock cleaned. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination, but we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the west. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No. They're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it, if I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low income person. But they were told, if these people are freed, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border? Is that really what we believe? We know that if that border is closed, it isn't going to be closed to capital. It isn't going to be closed to goods. If you have a border that can be crossed by capital looking for the highest return on investment or goods looking for the highest price, but labor is chained to its country of origin, how is that going to work to the benefit of working people? By definition, it doesn't. By definition, it immiserates the working class. Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. You're listening to the One Human Nation show as we listen to Tim Wise talking about this whole concept of, how did we get to where we are, and the journey continues. This whole the distractions that happen, that we kind of focus on the fact that there is such a thing as this concept of working poor, that people are working hard, but they're still not able to save money, create wealth, and figure out where they need to invest their money. Some are, some not, and so the question becomes, how do we break out of that silo? How do we start having these conversations? How do we get ourselves out of this position of being maneuvered like chess pieces? Because it's in our best interest for everyone that's not part of the elite to figure it out. So we're going to listen to this second part from Tim Wise, and then I'm going to share some information with you from what I learned on some of the programs locally from the Savannah Police Department that I think would be of interest to those of you in Savannah. And I want to share that with you because a lot of times we don't hear about the different programs. So I do want to share some of this information with you and ask you to, figure out how can you get these programs in your community. But right now we're going to listen to this second part of this talk from Tim Wise.
Divide and conquer. But the best example of all, perhaps, in the contemporary era, in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina. Here you have two communities that were the most hard hit. The lower Ninth Ward, mostly black community, 94% African American, about 40% official poverty rate, heavy working class community. And right across the canal, St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, 95% white, also working class, high levels of poverty, economically very similar. And at the end of the day, in those first few days of September 2005, more similar than they probably would have realized. Because when those levees broke, they all got their stuff jacked. They all got their stuff destroyed. But if you had asked white folks in Chalmette, and I've done it, who was the cause of the problems in the greater New Orleans area prior to that flooding, they would have pointed across that canal at those black folks, wouldn't have called them black folks, and would have said, that's the problem. 70% of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the irony? The irony is that while they were blaming black people for their problems, while they were blaming black people for the conditions of the greater New Orleans area in which they lived, nobody was paying attention, least of all they, to the fact that these white elite politicians, either in Baton Rouge or in Washington, whose job it was to secure those levees, to make sure that levy funds were spent in the proper way and that they were spent at all, those mostly white and mostly elite politicians did nothing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just the black folks in the lower Ninth Ward they didn't care about. They really couldn't have given a rat's about those poor and working class white folks either. And yet, when the people of Chalmette, people of St. Bernard Parish got back into session, first time they had a city council meeting, parish council meeting after the flooding, the lights aren't even on yet. The water isn't even hooked up. And the first order of business was to pass an ordinance saying that you couldn't rent property in St. Bernard Parish to anyone who wasn't a blood relative. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before. But now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply. You can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now, they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatened and they got rid of the ordinance. But my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time and march on Baton Rouge and march on D.C. and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
Wow. So that if you just tuned in, you're listening to One Human Nation show, and that was a TED Talk from Tim Wise, and there's plenty of information out there if you go on YouTube and Google Tim Wise to really get a different perspective. And I think what strikes me about this is talking about Katrina and New Orleans, but there are plenty of cities in this country that are one step away from another disaster, that if they are hit with another natural disaster, they're going to be in the same boat they were in. And it's plenty of them. It's not, there are areas in Savannah that historically flood, and it's the same thing over and over again. So the question becomes, what are we doing with the resources we have to get things fixed? And there is this constant divide that's out there, that there's this message or something always happens to create the distraction so that the focus is not really on the real problem. And it's uncanny to me how that happens. It's like, wow, they've done it again. And it's constant. It's this constant distraction of keeping us divided. And we've got to get smarter than that. And that's everyone from the local level and working through the dynamics of who you're putting in place for city council, the mayor, the DA's office. One of the key positions for Savannah that's going to be opening, that's vacant and the search is on for. There's an interim police chief, but I think I've mentioned before that the police chief that was there, Chief Lumpkin, resigned. And so there's a search on, and there was some phenomenal work that he was able to do in the 3 years that he was there. And so some of the things that I want to share with you in Savannah is, to ask you if you've heard of any of these programs and talk to your city council representatives to see how you can get these programs in your community. So one of them is called the Explorers Program, and this is a program that offers teenagers and young adults ages 14 to 20 where they can get hands-on engagement and learning experiences with law enforcement professionals. So the whole point of this, and I discovered these programs in listening to the city council work session from January 18th, and they were kind of given, a report on, this is the thing that we do for public safety. These are the programs that are out there. Now, the problem is how do you get these programs implemented? Because one of the major issues for Savannah to work through is making sure they are hiring the right police officers and, working through any morale issues. But so that there are plenty of programs that they have. As a matter of fact, another one is called the PAL Summer Camp. And this is where it started, I think, in Philadelphia, but it's all about residents and business owners getting together to have organized physical activities for the youth, so they're not, we call it idle hands, that they are engaged in something positive during the summer. There's another program called Caught Doing Good. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory, but I think these are all about how to break down that stigma and that barrier of kids having this fear of law enforcement, because I've said it before, one of the most difficult jobs out there, I think, is law enforcement, and I don't mean that lightly. There's a juvenile officer program. They had a pumpkin painting with police program, a roll call in streets. That seemed like it was an interesting program also. Coffee with a cop, and that was done in conjunction with some of the McDonald's. And I think we've all heard of National Night Out. And then there was a reading program to students, a community program that involved the students and the parents and the police officers. So there are programs that are out there. The problem becomes if you're about the business of policing and making sure that communities are safe, how do you find the time to participate in these programs when your evaluation is performance-based in a different direction? And you will pick that up once you start watching some of the city council meetings, especially the one from January 18th. The other information that I want to bring to your attention is that the Savannah Police Department had a report done, and you can Google it. It's called the Berkshire Report. It was done by a third-party consultant, and it really broke down, and it's a big report. It's like over 170 pages in this report, but it breaks down everything that the Savannah Police Department needs to work on, things that they're doing well, areas where they need to improve. So when you start seeing, what they're doing and they start referring to, these are some of the things recommended from the Berkshire Report, at least take a look at it so you can see where they're trying to get to, because I'm encouraged by knowing what the end goal is. And I realize that with anything, there's a journey to get there. But if we don't know, if we don't educate ourselves, if we don't learn, then we just kind of operate in our silo, and we kind of think everything may be worse than what it is, or maybe it's just as bad as what we think. So, I hope you have taken away some things from today's show. I can't believe how quickly time has gone. And remember, the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program were not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So some things to keep in mind about the One Human Nation show. There is now a podcast. So we're on iTunes. If you're an iTunes person, you can search for the One Human Nation show and subscribe to the podcast there. You can also subscribe to the podcast from the One Human Nation website, and that's onehumannation.info. If you would like to share some of your stories or connect with me, you can send me an email at mystory@onehumannation.info. That's mystory@onehumannation.info. I encourage you to continue your journey through having these courageous conversations, and sometimes it's with your family and friends, as opposed to Facebook, social media. And by all means, that's one way to try it. It just typically, I don't see where it typically ends well, other than you can get your point across. So that is one way to do it. If that's where you are in your journey, it's like, I just need to get this point across, and it can be what it is. That's okay too, because at some point we do need to get beyond that to the face-to-face and having these courageous conversations. But we have to know how to have a civil discourse. So there's some rules of engagement involved with that, some tools that I picked up from doing race reconciliation workshops. So as I continue to get more familiar with what's available in Savannah, it gives me an idea of what direction we need to go in, so we can start having these courageous conversations and start really working on this bridge to reconciliation that needs to happen in Savannah. Because at the national level, there's not really too much you can do other than vote. There are some broken things about our political system. I that's a whole nother show to talk about. What is some of the issues with that at a national level. You can have an impact at the state level, but where you really, really, really can have the impact is at the local level. And it does require the time, energy, and effort and to learn more about what resources are available, what's already going on, because we don't need to, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just can't keep operating in this place of, well, let's not talk about it and maybe it'll go away, because it's not going away. And we have the statistics in our community to prove that, we have a higher than poverty rate that we need to have in some of our communities. And it's hard to get people engaged in thinking in terms of, well, Savannah is a great place to be, when they don't see that in their community. So we do have to do the reach out and make sure that we are connecting with everyone in our community to the best of our ability. And we're not quite there yet in Savannah, but there are many communities that haven't even started, or not awake to it. Others have already started in engaging in these conversations and making their voice heard on a local level. And we'll just continue to move through it. So I encourage you, as you go through your week, as you engage with different activities over the weekend, really start looking through the lens of reconciliation. See how these conversations that you're engaged in, is there a way to get to a deeper part by still being open and listening to the other person's point of view? So as we wrap up today's show, we're getting ready for Sound Limit with Troy Stoner. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a fabulous week.